Welcome to episode 36.
Great.
Okay, you gonna make me start off with...
It's
too long of a pause. We need to
We're getting close to 40.
Man, I'm excited about tonight because I actually didn't have to hardly do anything to get ready. Because we have a special guest tonight, folks.
It's your co-host,
Cammy Crawford.
You're listening to the Fight for Together podcast.
All right, what do you guys think about our new old intro?
We're going retro.
Okay, so let's light up some cigars here before we get too far into this.
Good call.
And maybe we will talk a little bit about what we hope this podcast is about.
Yeah.
This podcast is about us sharing about what we're thinking about in all areas of life, adventure, parenting, faith, family, and things that we consider to be related to social relationships for the future. So we do not have a requirement at all that you would want to agree with us. That's not even our hope. Our hope is that you would be challenged to engage in conversation with people around you that you care about, and even us, maybe over the comment section, because we'd like to hear your thoughts too and continue to engage in the conversation. Pause while we light our cigars. Pause while Cammy lights her second cigar of the day. Not judging. Trying not to judge.
That's why you have to remark about it.
Trying unsuccessfully not to judge. And tonight we're going to be doing a book review. Okay, so I get it. We are obsessed with sex, so we talk about it a lot. And faith, because it specifically pertains to our background and our interests. Hang on. Oh, yeah, that's good. And my hope is that, here's what I think. Whether or not you come from a church or the same background we do, my guess is you've been impacted by this line of sexual thought, religious sexual thought, because America is just kind of that way.
It was founded on a lot of these same principles, I think, of, puritanical.
So I don't care if you're religious or not, or ex-religious or not. I hope this conversation will help further that conversation. So without further ado, oh, you know what? Scrap that. We got some news.
All right.
We have a news article, fresh in. Headline: Judge allows parents to use dead son's sperm to make a grandchild.
Huh. This
is from the Rogue Rocket. I don't know what that is, but I think it's legit. Bullet point number 1. A judge has allowed the parents of a deceased West Point cadet to use their son's sperm for reproductive purposes. Okay, so the guy died. I'm not sure how. Mm-hmm. And they, he was an organ donor.
Skiing accident.
Oh, yeah. So he was an organ donor. So they kept him alive for a couple days, I think in a vegetative state. And while a judge... And there was no... There was no will that gave them permission, except for he had written a paper when he was in college saying that he wanted to have a wife and kids. So then they jacked his sperm.
But maybe not have kids if he's dead.
Yeah, seriously.
But that's kind of weird.
Okay, second bullet point. The family claims their son dreamed of having kids and says this will allow for his legacy and family name to be carried on. This is Game of Thrones shit. Sci-fi.
I know, I was
meets
gonna say.
Terminator.
It's a mix.
The ruling has raised several ethical concerns over whether or not it is okay to posthumously reproduce without someone's consent. Yeah, you think? Wow. What do you think about that? That's weird.
Yeah. It is weird. I mean, I feel for the parents. Like, I don't know. Like, how much are they actually doing this for him, and how much are they doing it for themselves?
They're doing it for themselves.
They talk about legacy, though. I guess that's
for
their
themselves.
legacy too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It just, I don't know.
I mean, so
Yeah,
it's one thing, like, you know what's tragic is when you hear about this, right? Like, a chick gets pregnant from a dude, then the dude goes off to war and dies, right? And then the baby has no dad, and that's, like, tragic, and everyone kind of mourns that. Mm-hmm. Well, in this case, you have the choice up front. You're making a kid from the beginning that doesn't have a dad, never had a shot at a dad. That's so weird. The dad wasn't alive when they're conceived.
Well, not to mention, aren't they the ones that are going to raise the kid? So then the kid won't actually be with their mom either.
It does. I don't even know if it says that. I mean, I actually
okay.
haven't read the article. I read a report on it, and I'm just reading the headlines here.
Yeah. And some people would say, well, that's more than a lot of kids have. But you don't actually make it happen.
Yeah, you don't make... I mean, if your biological clock is done, you can adopt kids. You can, I guess, try and figure out the science with your own body, whatever other options are there. Mm-hmm. You can do foster kids or whatever. But to make... I don't know. To me, this is like an obsession with legacy, bloodline.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is like Game of Thrones shit. This is like we need our clan to exist in its purest form for all time or something.
Watch the kid's a girl, and then they're like, dang it. She can't get married and change her name then. Otherwise, our legacy name is not going to be carried
I think it's too far. I think it's an indicator that it's too far. I guess, I don't know if I should say it should be illegal or wrong. How the hell do you decide these things? Who would have even thought that you'd have to have a law that says, like, no jacking dead people's sperm?
Yeah. It kind of freaks me out because I was just thinking about, like, if this was done to me. I don't know. I guess, like, maybe he doesn't care.
I don't think it can be done to you.
Well, can't you take eggs?
Your eggs? Oh, dang.
Do the same thing, right?
Oh, shit. That's pretty heavy duty, I guess.
Well, whatever. And even if it couldn't be done to me, I could put myself in his shoes and say, like, I don't know if I'd like that. But maybe he doesn't care because he's, like, dead and somewhere else or whatever.
I don't think dead people care.
Yeah. So at this point, well, you can believe that. Sure.
I don't think dead people care. Okay. That's all. That was the news. Okay, so today we're going to be doing a book review. Cammie, you recently read this book called Pure.
Yep.
You want to read the subtitle there and talk about the author and what this thing's about?
Yes. This book is called Pure. Inside the Evangelical Movement That Shamed a Generation of Young Women and How I Broke Free by Linda Kay Klein. I really enjoyed this book, like not in a way where it was like fun to read, but a lot of what I was reading was very familiar to me, and there was parts that were actually hard to read because it unearthed a lot of my emotions of what I went through as a girl and as a young woman.
Can you give us a little sneak peek of what you went through as a girl? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, she talks a lot about shame around a woman's sexuality. And I definitely felt a lot of shame around my own sexuality and didn't really know like that. I didn't know that my sexuality was mine, and it was actually something that I don't know that.
So can you give us the 2-minute bio of like what was your life like growing up from junior high or whatever your sexually formative years?
Yeah.
How would you tell that story?
I was a really reserved, compliant, good kid. I basically did everything I was told to do, and I felt like I could never, like my body, like I didn't feel like I could wear things. I didn't want to wear things that people could see my body. So I like made sure I was well covered, and a lot of that had to do with how I was brought up with my beliefs and about my own body. And I don't.
So nothing like sexy.
Oh no. I actually think I was ashamed of being a woman for really up until like a few years ago. Like I think I actually didn't think that being a woman was as good or as being a man, basically. Like there was something to be.
My ass hurts. These chairs are not comfortable. That's a fact.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Mm-hmm. But I felt like my sexuality, my body, or being a woman was something to be ashamed of. And in junior high, I had a relationship with my youth pastor that was abusive, predatorial. Yes. And I felt like I had to keep that totally secret.
Because that was your first sexual experience, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And
predominantly emotional.
And I didn't know how to deal with any of my emotions, and I didn't have anyone to turn to because no one talked about your sexual emotions, especially. So I just kind of carried it with me for 5 or 6 years as this was going on. And there was a large part, like, I think my sexuality, I repressed. Like I kind of turned off in a lot of ways. Like,
so what do you mean by that? I feel like repressed is a overused word. So like, give us some examples.
Like it was there, but I felt guilty over it. Like I felt guilty for any feelings I'd have for someone, like any sexual, like even feeling turned on, like felt guilty to me. Like that whole domain.
Like you've never talked about getting turned on as a teenager.
Yeah, I don't really remember. Because I didn't have the term. I didn't know what that was. So I'm sure it like happened. Actually, I know it happened, but I don't think.
How do you know it happened?
Well, because I would get like butterflies in my stomach when I would like see my youth pastor, and I don't think I get like a lady boner, or I don't even know. Like those are the kind of things I can't really, because I don't think I can't recall that kind of stuff because I don't think I had the language or awareness of it at the time.
When you say lady boner.
Yeah. What?
You mean?
I just mean like you feel things down there. You're like, ooh. I mean, girls don't have dicks, but they have other stuff, like clitorises but I didn't even know what that was back then. I didn't even really know, like, I don't even remember knowing that a guy had a penis. Like, I was so... Sheltered's a nice word to say about that.
Well, okay.
But I think I was, like, neglected. Like, my sexuality, my knowledge base about who I was and the world around me, I think I was that whole part of me was neglected.
Man, this is the good stuff. I feel like we should do I should just interview you and ask.
I didn't know you were going to talk about me. I thought we were talking about this book
and have you describe lady boners. This is like This is the good stuff. You're welcome out there,
Yeah.
folks. Okay, so let's fast forward to marriage then. How's that?
Yeah. So, I mean, our dating engagement period was like super fun for me,
Yeah, it was.
but it was also really guilt ridden. Like I couldn't ever fully enjoy it. And then and this is the son of a bitch, right? Once we actually were married, and when I actually, at least according to this code that I used to believe, I could fully enjoy it, I couldn't because I had so much shame around a lot of things, but definitely my sexuality.
So it turns out that getting married doesn't turn that off if you've been feeling that your whole life.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, anything you want to say to just bring this story up to current day? I mean, I guess there's a lot from the last 5 years, but let's just...
Yeah. I think for a really long time, like most of our marriage, I felt really tortured. Like my sexuality felt really tortured to me. Like I would enjoy it, but then only a part of it, and then a huge part of it I didn't know how to enjoy, and it was like I kept wanting to just like push it away from me, push it away. And we had a ton of conflict around our sex life, married sex life. And what hasn't been until the last few years where, I mean, I just remember going back again. I just remember when I was into this, like praying and was like, God, can you please fix me? Can you please, make me whole, or make whatever the pain I was feeling. Can you just take this away, or I didn't even really know what.
Which I think it might be important and very pertinent to this discussion to say that physically everything functioned.
Yeah.
All your lady boners worked, and you were having consistent, regular orgasms. Because I think people might jump to that and be like, oh, well, maybe this is a medical thing. But you were there and functioning, and technically you were enjoying it. But so what we're describing is actually emotional, right?
Yes, but those physical and emotional are so interwoven together that you can't actually separate it. But I do know that some people have medical issues. A lot of actually not all, but a lot of women's sexual dysfunction actually is because of their emotional well-being.
Yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make. Mm-hmm. So someone might say, well, go see a doctor, but we've concluded that that
wasn't the problem.
This torture issue that you're talking about was not from a physical...
No, it was all psychological and emotional issues I was dealing with, for sure. Yeah. So what hasn't been since the last few years, where I felt... I mean, really, it actually came about, like a lot of I would call it freedom, and just being able to fully, or at least more fully, embrace my sexuality and your sexuality. That's the thing. Like, once you can embrace your own, you can actually embrace other people's.
And your kids.
Including your kids, absolutely. But I don't think it's an accident that when I started shifting a lot of my beliefs about what I believed about God and what I believed about a lot of the purity stuff that I used to believe, all of a sudden, like, a lot of stuff just started to fall away for me.
So a little crash course. This book is titled Pure, which is kind of a play on a word that was so common in our growing up.
Yeah, it's almost kind of embarrassing to say the title of this book, but it's so appropriate too. But I think if you were just to say pure, people would think it's actually about how to be pure, like in this code.
I was thinking about gold.
Gold.
Like pure gold.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I think to people outside of the religious culture, like they might not even know what that word meant or how that word was used.
That's true. Yep.
But for us, it was synonymous with wholesome living. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I just want to give people a few examples that were the way we use this word or heard this word. Because now we call it purity culture, but that's kind of the derogatory. I don't think it's derogatory, but I think it puts it in its place and says this isn't necessarily a biblical belief. It's a cultural code that has possibly some overlap with the Bible, but also it's very independent from the Bible. And in purity culture, there was this call to be quote unquote pure, to save yourself for marriage. There was this campaign called True Love Waits that was like really heavy at this time period. Yeah. That was like, don't have sex until marriage. There's no such thing as safe sex. There was purity rings, right, which you had, which was like you wear this thing until, and that's not biblical, but everyone had them, right?
As if your sexuality or virginity or whatever the hell you want to call it is something you could actually give away.
Well, so there's even that. There was, being a virgin was a badge of honor.
Right. Yeah, which I definitely don't believe that anymore. But, yeah, I don't know what I was going to say. Oh, yeah. One of the things she talks about is that the funny thing about purity culture is there is no one code of purity. Like there's so many evangelical denominations and churches and tribes, whatever you want to call them, and they each have their own code.
Like the Baptists, it's like no dancing. And then, some people it's like no kissing. Some people it's like no holding hands. Like there are certain colleges where you couldn't like sit next to each other. Right. That you go into a chapel service, they'd say you have to like leave room for the Holy Spirit in between you, which was like the Holy Spirit, I think, was a book width. Yeah. That's
6 inches or something. Yeah, which shows how arbitrary this stuff was. I mean, I guess it just shows that it's a culture. So whatever culture you were a part of defined that for you.
So do you want to just like summarize this book?
Yeah. So Linda Kay Klein, she just went on this journey because from the age of 12 or 13, I believe, she stepped into the evangelical culture and was like all in. And so she was definitely shaped and formed by this purity culture. Well, it eventually, later on in life, she had a lot of issues, as I think a lot of people do, with what she was told about herself and her sexuality, and being able to then live a healthy, normal sexual life. And so she went on this journey where to find wholeness for herself, but also I think she was really passionate, or she is really passionate about what this culture has done, specifically to women, but I think I equally has been done to men too, but in a different way. But she went specifically towards women because that was her experience, obviously. So she interviewed a bunch of women from all different kinds of evangelical denominations. Some of them were people she knew, some of them they weren't. And what I find really fascinating is that she spent 10 years. So she interviewed these women, and then 10 years later, she interviewed them again. And some of them declined, but I think most of them she was able to re-interview. And so she was able to even...
I wonder why they would decline.
Yeah. She was even able to just track their journey in 10 years from, maybe kind of... A lot of them were hesitant to talk about it when she first talked to them. And then 10 years later, they were in a completely different place.
Dude, that cat just walked past my leg and it freaked me out. It's like tail pushed against me. So, by the way, I was like trying to look up like what the definition of evangelical is.
Oh.
It's pretty freaking broad.
Yeah, it is. It's very
broad.
Of
or according to the teaching of the gospel of the Christian religion. Noun, a member of the evangelical tradition in the Christian church. That's kind of a cyclical. So when we say evangelical, we're referring to like a modern iteration of Christianity.
Because evangelical has only been around, I don't even know, but it's like 30, 40 50 years maybe.
Okay, so that's what we mean when we say it.
Yeah.
Okay, are we going to just jump into an excerpt from this book?
Yep, let's do it.
So the structure today is we're just going to be reading like 3 different passages and discussing them, 3 or 4, I think.
Okay. So I'll just begin. That year, I began to piece together an epidemic that I have not been able to turn away from since. Evangelical Christianity's sexual purity movement is traumatizing many girls and maturing women haunted by sexual and gender-based anxiety, fear, and physical experiences that sometimes mimic the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Based on our nightmares, panic attacks, and paranoia, one might think that my childhood friends and I had been to war. And in fact, we had. We went to war with ourselves, our own bodies, and our own sexual natures, all under the strict commandment of the church. So, as I read this...
That sounds like brutal.
It sounds brutal, and I feel like people won't get it. Like to even put it against war.
When I hear that sounds like overly dramatic to me.
It does. And but she has these stories of these women and even those women like felt that way. Like, oh, they just minimized their pain because so much of, I kind of like liken it to mental illness. You know how mental illness is so misunderstood?
Yeah, and for a long time, people are like, snap out of it.
Yeah, because you can't see it. Like with a war, you can see, oh my gosh, like you had to kill people and you almost got killed. It's very physical, right? But with this, it's not. It's so emotional and psychologically damaging that it's really hard to pinpoint and see it. Like when you look at someone, you're like, well, you look fine to me. But then there's these just stories of just like crazy, like they're basically these women's bodies are starting to react to the trauma that they went through.
So to define this trauma.
Well, I was going to say, like, your body doesn't lie. That's what's interesting to me. Like, your body knows what it's been through.
We're not talking about rape or beatings or molestation. We're talking about something else.
Right. And
so can you read that last line again?
Mm-hmm. We went to war with ourselves, our own bodies, and our own sexual natures.
Okay, see, that... I'm saying it sounds dramatic to me, but I actually believe it. And here's why. I've seen that.
Yeah.
And I've felt that and been through that myself. And I consider myself pretty fucking resilient and robust. Like, I can take pain. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know how to handle the Christian teaching about the reality as I saw it. Because, and I experienced it in sexuality, but I actually experienced it more acutely in other ways. Where there's so much emphasis on this idealistic of what should be. And this what should be is essentially asexual until marriage. Like masturbation is frowned upon. Premarital sexual activity of any kind is frowned upon. Mm-hmm. And you're not supposed to get married in our culture until you're 20 at the earliest. Mm-hmm. Really like 25 to 30. So really you have this 15-year period minimum, I'm taking from age 15, where you start to become sexuality starts to express itself in your body more and your emotions. And you have this part of you that's really unacceptable to your most important community. And you have to essentially either push this part of you down or split, which causes it to kind of like split off from who you really are. And the long-term consequences of that, I think that's the basis of PTSD.
Yeah.
You have these experiences happen at war. You don't know how to process them because you're not given those tools as a 20-year-old dude. So you suppress it. Mm-hmm. And it comes out. It always comes out. You can't. Your body was
can't
not
lie.
made to suppress any part of who you really are.
Right.
So that's because sexuality, reading between the lines, is frowned upon, suppressed, and all the rest of it. Because they don't really say that. They don't say sex is bad. In fact, they say the opposite. That's what makes it a tricky son of a bitch. Because they're like, sex is good. God made sex. But yet, by not talking about it and not endorsing any version of it outside of marriage, then you're forced to come to the conclusion that's really the most natural one, which is actually you're saying it's bad. I mean, you're not saying it's bad, but you're saying it's bad.
Right.
And for me, I mean, just to give some context for people that aren't in the church for me was more important to me than my parents. It was more formative to me than any teacher I had in school. My parents, any mentor I've ever had, any book I've ever read, it was like the gatekeeper of like my eternal salvation and my eternal worth and being and my purpose. Mm-hmm. So what the church said or taught about sexuality, directly or indirectly.
Yeah, because I think it's really important to state if you didn't line up with these teachings.
Fuck, those are the dog freaking out upstairs.
If you didn't line up with these teachings, there was a lot at stake. It wasn't just that you would get kicked out of a group of people. I mean, that would be bad enough. But you also have hanging over your head, you're taught this is what God believes. So someday when you die, you're going to like face God and he's going to be like, how dare you? Yeah, I mean, there's just like these huge threats like looming overhead. So, I mean, it wasn't just this life. It was the next life, that we're talking about here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next excerpt. Can't just smoke all the time now, huh? You actually have to do some work around here.
Okay. The whole time, my childhood friends and I were being told that we were stumbling blocks. Our accusers were, even then, placing the real stumbling blocks before us. Purity-based shaming and judgmentalism that pushed many of us right out of the church.
Okay, so I want to clarify that a little because that lingo might be unfamiliar to some, but
yeah, what's stumbling block?
I think there's a verse in the New Testament, and I think it was Jesus maybe or one of those guys, and he said that you're going to be a stumbling block, meaning that you're going to obstruct people's faith. And growing up, that was used specifically towards women. And in fact, I heard Linda Kay Klein talk about this in a podcast interview where she said, because she had I think she's like a bigger woman where she had like curves or she was curvier and she was extroverted and outgoing.
Yeah.
So just by being a woman that had boobs or a butt or whatever,
right,
and being out like an outspoken or extroverted, like boisterous type of personality,
right,
she was called a stumbling block like all the time.
Just by
basically
existing.
For existing. Yeah. So she's always trying to change. And it's kind of like what you said, how it was like pretty arbitrary. Mm-hmm. It's always like kind of, there was never, no one could ever point to an exact, it's kind of like, oh, you're being too flirty, or your clothes are.
She said that she always got cast as the sexual woman. Like if there was like some kind of play, like they would. She's
the harlot.
Yeah, they would put her. Oh my gosh. Probably because.
What she said in this interview was that she was being referred to as an object, a stumbling block, more than a person.
Yeah.
But okay, so I was just really trying to provide that context of what a stumbling block was. But what she's saying is, more than her being the actual stumbling block for male sexuality in real life, what the church did to her, or these people really, was far more of a stumbling block to them, because the judgmentalism and the shame, which, by the way, are things that Jesus was much more hardcore about and anti than any sexual ethic or code.
Right.
They the church has created a far bigger issue, which is the whole point of this book, I guess, of jacking people up with shame and judgment than she ever did by causing a guy to like get a boner.
Yeah.
Is that it? You don't have anything else to say about that?
No, I think you pretty much summed it up.
Oh, all right.
Good job.
I didn't even read the book.
So this kind of goes with what I just said, goes along with it. The first stumbling block those raised as girls in the purity movement must overcome is the message that if you are suffering, it's your fault. It may be your sin, it may be your psychosis, but it is certainly not the shaming system you find yourself in. So the system, and this has been my experience, the system has to be protected above all. Like, it doesn't matter if there's casualties of people on the wayside, protect the system. Now, it was never called the system. It was called what God wanted.
The body of Christ.
Or, yeah, all these...
The community,
these
flock.
lingo, spiritual lingo, that made it seem like it was the only way to view life.
Can you read the first line again?
Yeah. The first stumbling block those raised as girls in the purity movement must overcome is the message that if you are suffering, it's your fault.
See, I suffered. It kind of pisses me off a little bit. This is just towards women, but I guess that's just her angle because I feel like the guy part is
I think
underrepresented.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't think she...
And I
even think she talks about that.
I guess the last excerpt we're going to read is about that. But, you know, as a guy, I was taught any sexual thought I have is sin, and it offends and hurts God, and it offends and hurts basically the girls around me and my future wife. So let's say I see this chick and I'm like, you know, I'm a horny 18-year-old, and I'm like, man, she'd be awesome looking naked.
Or can we just say you're human? I mean... Let's just say you're human. You have to, which encompasses all that, but...
I don't know what you're saying, but okay, I'm human.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the system called you to be less than human. Like you had to be kind of a robot.
Yeah, but we didn't call it that at the time. I mean, I was just a dude, and I would get a boner thinking about this naked girl, but she was wearing clothes.
A dude boner.
That's redundant.
Whatever.
But I was taught that this desire, like, it was my fault and it was wrong. Like, it was unnatural. And I shouldn't have this. So then I have to pray it away, confess it away, do some sort of like retribution to change. You know, read more scripture or, you know, find more accountability or whatever it would be. But come to find out, that only gives more power to that type of sexuality, I think. What you resist persists. That's the psychological phrase that we've been believing more and more lately. And so, you know, people wouldn't exactly say it's your fault, but when the system represents that, you know, essentially singleness is asexual, then when you experience sexuality as a single, or heck, as a married person thinking about another naked woman, whatever it would be, or a dude thinking about a dude,
right?
Then you totally believe it's your fault. And this is where, like,
well, you think there's something wrong with you when there's actually
because no one
nothing
talked about
wrong with you.
No one would talk about. And this is where, like, getting into the Catholic Church and the priests molesting little kids, like, I get it. Like, not that justifies what they're doing, but they don't have a way to talk about it. They're told they're not sexual, but they are.
Right.
And it has to come out. So it comes out somewhere. And it can't come out with, you know, marriage because you're not allowed to be married. So, you know, the system is... But instead of pointing out the system and saying it's flawed... I mean, they must feel terrible amounts of guilt, and I'm not even getting into, like, rightfully so, blah, 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 all that. But it's doomed to failure to begin with. So to me, this reminds me of the Black Sheep episode we did, where we talked about, I do think you were right with the first thing you said, where it's just like, if you don't fit in, the system's not going anywhere. It doesn't budge. It doesn't move. And I think it's important to say that a lot of times the system is not biblical. And the more I've been fascinated by the teachings of Jesus himself, one of the things he primarily did was disrupt the system of the time. And I think we feel like we've evolved and created a better one that Jesus somehow endorses.
Yeah.
But it's like weaponized to protect a class system, basically, that I think is pretty equivalent to the types of people that Jesus would get really pissed off about.
Yeah. So the next excerpt is actually a story, and I think I'll just try to read just a few paragraphs so that you get a feel for this story. So this is a girl that I think she was interviewing, and she basically had this panic attack, and this is the story about that. One day I went to my anthropology class and I was feeling really weird. I started low-level shaking. I went back to my room and my heart just started beating so fast. I'd never felt anything like this. I couldn't stop it. The shaking took on a greater rising. Then I remember I tried to stand up and I fell on the ground. I thought I was having a heart attack. I really thought that I might be having a heart attack. I called one of my closest friends. He ran over to my apartment and took me to, I can't remember, but I ended up at the hospital. A doctor gave me Valium, which made my body be like, and her name's Scarlett. Scarlett made the sound of a robot shutting down. The doctor was a Greek woman who I really liked. She asked, "Can you tell me what you think brought this on?" I said, "I think I'm not supposed to be with my boyfriend." I recognized how embarrassing that was to say when I was in the hospital, but I really thought this is what brought it on. I hadn't told her anything about myself, but her second question to me was, "Did you have sex with him for the first time? And do you feel ashamed and bad about that?" I wonder what led her to see somebody having a panic attack and think. I grew up in a very, very evangelical state, Scarlett interrupted me. It is a hotbed of evangelicalism. Almost everybody there. There are almost no liberal Christian people really at all. Scarlett said, seemingly implying that she might not be the first person this doctor saw whose religious sexual shame manifested as a panic attack. So, if I remember right, it's not even, it's, I don't even think she had sex, but it was just like, not that even matters, but it just shows you that it's such a psychological, emotional trauma state that she was in, that even the possibility of her having any type of sexual relationship with someone brought this panic attack on for her.
Yeah, there's like consequences from this shit. I mean, so we were married and we're having sex and you're in like tears consistently first 5 years.
Yeah.
And you're not in any physical pain. Right?
I mean, sometimes sex was painful, but I think
that's not why you were in tears.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think it was like a mixed thing. I don't even know. Like, I just know I was so, like, I felt like I needed to just submit and be dutiful. And
my point is, it was emotional.
Yeah. Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think, but which is tied to, yeah, right. I think most of it was, yeah.
You're saying some of it was physical?
I just think I think kind of the way the body works is if you're not into sex, like, your body doesn't actually lube up. And so it is more painful for the woman. Like, I think all that took place for me. Yeah.
Okay.
A little sex ed class for you guys here.
Well, I just don't, like, in my recollection, that wasn't like what was the byproduct of the tears. I'm just saying, like, this stuff. I mean, you didn't have anxiety attacks, But
yeah, I think it was really deep. Like I didn't really know why I was crying.
Yeah.
Right.
But
yeah.
no one was like pinching. You couldn't like point to a part of your body and say
No,
that hurts.
no.
Okay, that's what I mean.
No.
So there was something deep going on where you were like super conflicted.
Yeah.
And to this day, we don't like fully understand it, except for when we read books like this, we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And I want to point to another story, because this type of stuff, you know, some people, I think they're just like, oh, well, that's just fucking life. You just like deal with it. Those are the cards you're dealt. Let's like get used to it. No, like we're not about that. Like I want freedom for us, and I want freedom for our listeners from, and I think there's another story that's possible. And maybe we're not going to get there in this lifetime, like full healing or whatever, but to at least point to the thing and say, oh, that there's a better way than that, and we're going to work towards healing. That's what I want to be about. So to look at that and to say, oh, there's a better way where you don't have to cry every time you have sex with someone that loves you and that's a part of your family and that you're committed to. Not that we didn't have our problems, but I'm not going to fucking disclaim our marriage, but you know, we had been together for a long time, and everything else, a lot of other things were good.
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess just the point I'm making is like, there's a huge consequence to this. You know, I mean, the anxiety attacks, those seem like extreme, and we didn't have that. Like, that's like a medical condition, I guess. Like, and we can't, probably a lot of people don't relate to that exactly. But there's a lot of things short of that also. And another example I have, probably more current day, is masturbation. Like, you've never enjoyed masturbation. I can't really enjoy masturbation in front of you. Because to me, and I can do all sorts of shit. Like, I've been skydiving. I can tattoo my body for 12 hours at a time. I can hike the fucking 2,000-mile Appalachian Trail with a kid on my back. Like, I can do stuff I put my mind to, but I can't masturbate in front of Cammie. Because to this day, there's so much shame around this activity. And wrap your mind around this for a second. Like, even for the Christians, like, that's like touching myself in front of my wife that I've been married to for 20 years. So that's like heavy, that's like weird. You know, that's like, there's some sort of block there where it's like, that's not freedom. I mean, it's one thing if I choose not to, but to not be able to, I mean, that's not an anxiety attack, but it might be just as crippling or limiting, because we don't know what the potential, we don't know what we're missing out on. And I guess that's what, you know, that'd be my encouragement to some of these listeners. I think if you're dealing with sexual shame or pain, it doesn't even need to be sexual. And if you're settling, you know, I think a lot of people, it's just not worth it to try and get help or to try and change or to try and talk to their spouse or partner. And they're saying like, well, you know, I've gotten used to it. Like, what's the big deal? Well, you never know the cost you're paying until you've been on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And you've really lived life without that type of pain and suffering, and you've got healing.
Right.
And what I've seen in our experience is every single time we've moved on and got healing and been through all the bullshit to weed the stuff out and feel the pain and mourn the loss and all that hard work that goes into that, never once have I looked back and said, oh, that wasn't worth it. I wish I was back in my previous state. Never once.
Yeah.
So I think if you take a gamble and if you're like, oh, I'm going to face this for this supposed freedom that you don't know because you've never experienced it, but maybe you can just like trust someone to know that it's there, that you're not going to regret it.
No, I don't think so. Okay. Last story, and this is about a guy. So here you go.
Go for it. Wait on me.
Though purity culture messaging about girls and boys is very different, the gender-based messages are absorbed by all. For instance, boys hear girls being told that they must cover their bodies and avoid flirtation in order to protect themselves from boys and men's uncontrollable sexual virility. What does that say about men? Some of these boys may find themselves wondering, or more specifically, what does that say about me? Several years ago, writer David Ellis Dickerson spoke about his experience as a young evangelical man on the radio program This American Life. At one point, David called up his childhood friend Derek, the son of a missionary, and they exchanged stories. I developed a technique of seeing girls as just floating heads, Derek admitted to David. You just learn you're just not going to look below the neck. I was a cartoonist for my college newspaper, and I didn't actually know how to draw girls, really. I mean, you can see when I would draw a female figure, top to bottom in a cartoon, there's an awkwardness to it, because I didn't actually know what they looked like. Derek laughed. It's funny to look back and talk about them now, but it was all very dead serious back then. David understood. He did notice women's bodies, and the shame was tantamount. He recalled, on warm days, I would walk across campus feeling like a monster because I believed that noticing a girl's body was the spiritual equivalent of something like sexual assault. Every accidental glimpse of cleavage or a little extra leg was terrible, and at the same time, wonderful. Eventually, he found himself walking around campus, the library, the supermarket, perpetually hoping to see another accidental glimpse of something. Finally, he admitted his secret to his pastor. His pastor advised him to go to Sex Addicts Anonymous. When David, a 22-year-old virgin, told his story to the group of gathered sex addicts, there was, as one might expect, an awkward silence. A few days later, he went to a Christian counselor. The counselor advised him to go home and masturbate, to David's great shock. He bought a porn magazine, went home, masturbated, and, as he tells it, was immediately cured. It felt like a miracle, he said. It was so fast, so life-changing, that it was like converting all over again. I don't believe that stories such as David's and his friends are as uncommon as many might first assume. As my interviewee Joe said, women are taught their bodies are evil, men are taught their minds are.
I buy that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what was interesting to me about this story was that everyone's affected, and even whatever is told to, first of all, there's these gender binary roles in this system where girls fit here, boys fit here, and they're told different things, and it all impacts all of them. But it's crazy to be taught a part of yourself is evil. That's crazy.
Unless it's true.
Right.
Which is what they believe.
Which is what they believe. They believe in original sin and all this, like that humans are actually at their core bad and they need to be saved from their badness.
Which is it this book or is it the other book you're reading where like that concept, which is this idea that sin entered the world when Adam and Eve were there, and that is basically the cause of everything negative you see happening today. That's a relatively new belief.
Augustine in the 5th century, he put that up there, but before that, it was just like creation's good, and that's like what God said in the Bible: creation's good, and then creation's very good. Yeah. So that is, the history. It's interesting to know about. When you know about history, then you realize, oh, these things haven't always been, and a lot of this stuff is so subjective, and it's just passed down.
Which we've talked about this quite a bit, but what we've learned, the irony is when you try and ignore sexuality becomes your obsession. Even ignoring it becomes your obsession. Mm. And I learned this with money. As a Christian, I was obsessed with not having money. I thought money was bad. I didn't want to be rich. I didn't want to think about money. So therefore, all I thought about was not having money. I made it my goal to not have money and to not be seen with a brand name, whatever the heck. So we sat around bragging about how cheap our jeans were. But the tragedy is we were just as obsessed, if not more obsessed, than the people who actually had nice shit. And we didn't even get the nice shit.
Yeah.
So when you go around trying not to think about sex, trying not to address this part of you, I think it tends to take on this mythical power. And sex for me most of my life was this I was not allowing myself to have it. But deep down I believed that if I ever did, I had this like prayer almost that was like, I wanted like God to come back, but after my wedding night. Because I thought, like, if this thing is that prohibited, it's gotta be
good.
awesome.
Yeah.
And it kind of was. I'm not gonna downplay it, but it wasn't so life changing that it's like I don't think it was so good. It didn't need to be unnecessarily mythically more powerful than it already is.
Well, and then you weren't able to enjoy your sexuality until you get married. What about the poor fuckers who never get married? It's like, jeez.
They're poor fuckers.
I want to share this last one. Because,
okay, but we got a jam here because we're 54 minutes in.
Because this does talk about a lot of good things that I think is important to talk about. Okay. Generally speaking, purity culture excuses male sexuality and amplifies female sexuality. And it shames consensual sexual activity and silences non-consensual sexual activity. I'm going to read that one more time.
Hang on, I told you we're on a deadline here. You're trying to read it twice?
Yes. Generally speaking, purity culture excuses male sexuality and amplifies female sexuality. And it shames consensual sexual activity and silences non-consensual sexual activity. Sexual violence perpetrated by those within the community in particular is strictly censored, as it challenges the pure-impure binary upon which the purity movement is based. The binary demands that predators are outsiders, those 7 out of 10 rapes are
Holy crap, now you're reading more?
Just a minute. Perpetrated by someone known to the victim. And 55% of sexual assaults take place at or near a victim's home. One of the results of othering perpetrators is that victims can be psychologically unprepared to protect themselves when threats come from closer to home than they ever imagined they could. I thought this was really, really interesting because to me, it's like another cost of the system. If you can't actually protect people when something is so off limits. Like when it happens to them, then, like there's a story in this book about a brother and a sister, and the brother sexually abuses the sister, and the parents really don't do anything. Like they're just like, oh, hey, cut it out, and they don't actually see how, well, maybe, I don't know. They can't look at it. They can't actually look at it because there's so much shame around sexuality for themselves.
Well, that's what happened with you and the youth pastor.
Yeah.
I mean, it was happening to multiple girls, and nothing happened to him. Well, he got maybe let go of the job, but nothing. No charges were pressed or nothing. Mm-mm. He was even still working at a school. No one told anyone. Yeah.
Well, I ended up. Someone helped me when I was 18 file a report, but that was a few years later.
Okay, so great conversation.
Yeah.
Would you recommend this book, or who would you recommend it to?
I would recommend this book to, if you have been part of, if any of this sounds familiar to you, you've been part of a culture that had a lot of these same beliefs, or you have a lot of these same issues, or the second group of people I would recommend this to is just if you know someone who has, so that you can understand better what they're going through.
Okay. How many stars out of 10 do you give this?
9.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I think she did an amazing job, and I'm really passionate about it. And I just think for someone to actually stand up and write this out and take 10 years to do it, and so much of it's her own story. Yeah.
Okay. So 2 things. One is, if you want to buy this book, we'll put a link below. If you use our link below, it's an Amazon affiliate link, and I think we get 10 cents or 30 cents or 50 cents or something if you buy it with our link. And this is not in lieu of the chair fund, by the way, you cheap bastards. So don't buy the book there and then think that, oh, I contributed to the chair fund. That's for the college age fund, because we don't have a college fund. But that helps us out. It really does. And then in addition to that, if you want to buy the book and read it, and then if you want to start discussing it in the Fight for Together discussion group, I think that'd be cool. And some people are going to be like, oh, well, there's boys in there, there's girls in there, or whatever the hell. You're going to have to grow up, and everyone deals with this problem.
You'll have to let me know if people are doing that, because I want to get in on that
Facebook
discussion.
Account?
Oh, no, let's use yours.
All right. Oh, man, the cigar smoke is going straight in my mouth. What's it doing there? It reminds me of that gay joke where the guy's like, why are all these gay people putting their dick in my asshole? Maybe you're gay. Okay. It is now time for the phone line.
Hi, Ben and Cammie. My name is Beth Adams, and my husband and I watch your show, your vlog, and listen to your podcast. We're recent followers, and just wanted to question you about your last podcast. You had mentioned about porn, and I guess you really didn't mention porn, but you had said watching sex was fascinating, which I guess I would agree, but do you think it's okay is my question. What are your beliefs about porn? And I know that you're in recovery for sex addiction, but do you believe it's okay in a Christian marriage to watch porn? I would love to hear more about that.
Great, Beth Adams. You sound like a super fan. That's extra credit. Like listening to, what'd you say, all the videos and the podcast with her husband even?
I know.
That's bonus points or something. Okay, porn. It's interesting, yes, to a certain degree. What did you say? Is it okay? And do we think it's okay?
I don't have a problem with it, as long as, like, in a marriage, I think it's a good idea to discuss it. And if one person is, like, really not okay with it, I think it's probably a good idea to, like, flesh that out further. But I don't think it's like, I just think that might cause problems with the relationship.
I think that's a separate topic.
Yeah.
Because I would say that about eating at Arby's.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I don't have any problem with watching porn.
And this is not just marriage. This is any partnership or just any person, right? I mean, so I don't think we have a distinction between single or married. Like, it's okay for married people but not single people or something like that. What's helped me, I mean, since you're asking, I think I understand maybe where you're coming from, which we were taught porn is wrong. And like I just said in the previous comment, I feel like that gives it this power where it's like, it's sex, but it's just sex. And I get that it's like really interesting at first, you know, because especially as a young boy, I had never seen anything like that. And it was so taboo, and that's what made it so interesting to me. But as I've seen other cultures, and as we've been exposed to more porn, it really is not that interesting, or it loses its interest. And now I see it like I do cartoons. It's really exaggerated and shallow, and it has its place. Like, cartoons are interesting, but, you know, are cartoons wrong? No, they're just cartoons. Like, they're fake, and they have their place. They're, like, entertaining. But I don't think consensual people having sex is wrong. I don't think nudity is wrong. I don't think people getting aroused by anything in particular is wrong in and of itself. If you choose to act and violate someone else, like minors or someone unconsensually, I believe that's where it starts to be wrong. Now, you asked an interesting little twist at the end. You said, is it okay for Christian marriage? Which, just to toss this in there, Christian marriage, like we kind of talked about, it's a system of rules. And by definition, Christian cultural marriage in a purity culture defines that most of the time as some form of adultery. So, you know, I wouldn't define our marriage as a Christian marriage. Our marriage is just a marriage. And our friendships are just friendships. They're not Christian friendships. It's not Christian school. It's not Christian marriage. It's not our Christian house or Christian life and our Christian podcast. Because, and I'm saying that somewhat sardonically, but also, like, I think that really, you know, that lingo was something we grew up with, and it really was saying, are you going to fit this institution into this other institution? And we used to, but we don't anymore. We found it too restrictive, and a net negative.
Well, I think we used to see it as a very binary black or white thing. So like the Christian marriage is the sacred thing, and then porn is the unsacred or evil thing. And now I just see it as like people, I don't know, I just don't see it like that.
Yeah, and you can probably go through stages of watching too many cartoons, I guess.
Yeah.
Where you decide it's not healthy for you or you don't want to do it anymore. Oh, you know what I forgot to mention in the previous topic, but I think it applies here, is because some people are like, well, it's dangerous, porn is. Well, okay, fine. And so is premarital sex and not using condoms and getting AIDS and a bunch of other things that we were warned about as kids. But what this book brings up is that there's a danger to going the other direction and using shame as a mechanism to prohibit it. And that's what this book highlights. So I think what I want to do is have my eyes wide open to consequences on all sides so that we can make educated decisions as adults. Great question.
Hey, Ben and Cammie, this is Julie Wolf in Kentucky. I left a message and obviously it was too long, so I'm going to try to shorten this up. So delete the other one. I've been watching you guys since you were on the AT, and we are always inspired by you. And today's podcast about the three things that you learned running the marathon really spoke to me and kind of turned a light switch on for me. I've wanted to accomplish 50 hikes by the time I turned 50. Well, that came and went because of an injury, and I'm not exactly sure when I'll be able to complete that. But it's not just me doing it, it's me and my family. We all hike together, so it all kind of ties in together with the relationship, accomplishing things together and doing hard things together, and, you know, encouragement and all of that. But my question for you guys is, so what do you do when you aren't able to accomplish that goal, or you have a hiccup, or, you know, it all kind of works together. If you can't do something physically, then the mental stamina fails too, I think. So what would be your advice or on how to regain that? And if you've had an experience with that in the past, if you would share that, I would appreciate it. I love you all, and I appreciate you sharing your life with us, and I just hope that you continue to do so for a long time. Thanks. Bye.
It's kind.
Julie, she comments all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she in her previous message, she said that she listened to this marathon podcast and she had kind of a crappy attitude about it. And she was like, this is going to suck. I've heard everything they say about marathons. And then she said it was like her favorite podcast of all time.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa.
That's cool.
So yeah, that was really fascinating. Mm-hmm. This is a fun question for me.
Yeah, go for
There's
it.
two things I would say about setting goals. One is our best goals are weekly goals. I mean, the Appalachian Trail was fun, but the Appalachian Trail was not worth it if we put our weekly goals on hold for our lifetime to achieve a bucket list type thing. And this 50 hikes by the age of 50, it sounds a bit like a bucket list type activity, like a big meta goal, which I don't think those are bad. But I think the most power to us are in the weekly things that we can achieve today. Or when I say today, I mean this week. Because that's where life happens. And it's in the course of living a bunch of good weeks that we want to look back and then say, oh, we lived a good life. So what I would advise, hearing your situation, is to take the elements as much as possible that the reason why you did the 50 and 50 goal. Like, what did you want from that? It sounded like you wanted to do something difficult, something challenging, something that got you outside, and something that brought your family together. Well, if you just take those things and you ask, how can you implement those values every week? I'd be interested to hear what you come up with. You know, how could you get outside with your family and do something physical and challenging with people that you care about every week? at least attempt to do that every week, what would you come up with? And it might be, hopefully it would be like in your city. It would be attainable. It might not be. The thing is with these goals, they're not as epic and grand as 50 and 50 or a thru hike or a marathon or jumping out of an airplane or biking across the world or whatever. You don't get as much credit, so people don't think they're as sexy. But I think that's the most sexy thing ever.
I actually think it's those goals, those weekly goals, that even enable you to ever do the epic things.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
But what do you do? I think she also asked the question, like, what do you do if you find yourself not being able to do a bucket list goal? I think there's like more, like you have to kind of mourn that. Like that's sad. That would be really disappointing if you set to do this thing and then you have things beyond your control that happen and you're not able to do it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, like I think that could be a reality, but I wanted to have 3 books written this year. That was like my version of a bucket list goal. It's not going to happen.
Sometimes you have these wake-up calls, right? Where you're just like, oh, that doesn't mean I can't still do great things.
Well, I could be in perpetual disappointment right now.
Yeah.
Or I could just say, that was unrealistic, and I'd rather just commit to 3 hours a day of doing hard work of creating content.
And eventually...
And maybe books will get written. Maybe they won't. Like, who cares? Yeah. Like, if I'm doing the best I can or 3 hours a day...
Yeah.
That's, sometimes it's in the journey, not the destination, that cliche thing. I actually think that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, in maybe a time sense where, do the week, live a good week well. Mm-hmm. Great question.
Yeah.
Hi, Faith here from Los Angeles, California. I watched the vlog today, May 14th vlog, where Cammie shares about losing baby John 7 years ago. She touches on the concept of grief in the vlog and mentions that she really fully immersed herself in grieving the son that she lost. So that got me thinking to ask you guys to share some of your own experiences with grief, as well as some helpful tools and resources you could recommend for those who are grieving their own losses, whether it be a death or some other sort of loss that needs grieving. I've heard of grief mentioned as something that you must voluntarily enter into. And I just feel like as a culture we're not taught how to grieve, and therefore bad things may keep happening to us that we never fully grieve. So I was hoping you guys could share some of your insights. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's a good thing to talk about. I feel like she was asking us to share some experiences. Yeah. I feel like these last couple years, I've had to grieve multiple things at the same time. Like losing a lot of friendships, some family.
Our entire community.
Yeah. Even grieving, we talk about, even grieving past beliefs. Where you all of a sudden you find yourself, like if you've believed something your whole life and then all of a sudden you don't. I think that's actually something you have to grieve as well. And yeah, I do think it's a voluntary thing. Like I think you have to immerse yourself in it.
When our baby died, all I remember was we made this choice to not medicate ourselves, which meant like we tried not to like zone out on TV or drugs. That wasn't really our thing so much. Sex is probably another one that would be easy to use to medicate, but so we didn't do that, and we just had this goal for a month. We were just gonna like be together and cry, and we did that, and it hurt like hell. And then it didn't. It like went away, like slowly. We felt it, and then we felt it a little less. But I feel like we experienced like the pain. I mean, there's this whole belief about like what pain is like, and that it's a gift, not a curse. And I mean, we believe this like very, very deeply, which is why we don't mind doing things like the Appalachian Trail, because in our culture, I think that is so comfort oriented. When you have pain, we're experts in our culture at removing the pain or avoiding the pain. And that's very problematic if you view pain as actually a gift that's actually like an indicator on your dashboard that tells you there's something wrong, there's something missing from your life.
And there's something you need to address here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or something that you're able, because I don't like to see it as a rule either, like, oh, you have to address this. But if you do, it's better for you in the long run.
Yeah.
Like if your gas is out, you don't have to get more gas, but if you don't, your car's going to stop going.
Right.
It's kind of like that. So
right. I also think like the body is so beautiful in this way, like, and amazing and intelligent, where if you don't grieve something, eventually the body does it for you. It's kind of crazy that way, actually. You actually involuntarily grieve.
So what's been helpful to us? I think what's been helpful to us is processing it, which for us has looked like conversations. You know, someone in the previous question talked about me being in sexual recovery, which I'm not anymore. I haven't been for the last 2 or 3 years, but I was for 8 years. And in those 8 years, it was really helpful because it was a place where I could process things. In these meetings, I could just share and talk about what I was feeling and what I was struggling with every week. And now we have 12-step meetings as a family, or it's just a place where you can just talk about what's actually happening. Not what you wish was happening, not what should be happening, not what you want to be happening, but just what is. And so we talked. We had been trained in those kind of like techniques, and we just did that, like just listen. So that was a safe environment there. And then I think we probably like journaled a fair amount, like in various ways. I don't remember how. I mean, like, you know, I think Faith has seen, but we made this video, this music video, and played this song and stuff like that. But that was a way for us just to like face it, to just say this happened. You know, we took pictures of the baby, and we all held the baby, and we had a funeral, and we buried the baby, and you know, the kids cried and drew pictures. And I mean, those are just, there's no answer to this, but those are all just ways that we did it. And then you have that book you worked through. Was that helpful?
Yeah. I mean, at the time it was.
Grief Recovery Handbook. Mm-hmm. Would you recommend that?
I would recommend it if you're actually really going through something very acute. Because it was helpful because it felt like something I could do while I was going through it.
All right.
Hi, this is Cliff from Florida. I really like video games. I like old video games, new video games, video game history, and reading about video games, watching things about video games. And here y'all talk about. Hi, this is Cliff from Florida. I really like video games. I like old video games, new video games, video game history, and reading about video games, watching things about video games. And here y'all talk about video games in almost always a negative context. Alternatively, you talk about things like Netflix and Game of Thrones pretty positively. And so personally, I've always kind of thought of video games as an art form and a storytelling avenue that is in a lot of ways superior to those types of media where you just sort of sit there and consume it, but where you can actually interact with it. So I'm wondering why you think those types of activities are superior, or even if you do, to video games. Thanks.
I didn't know we put on. I can totally see maybe how that vibe got interpreted that way, but I didn't know. That's helpful to hear that. That's.
I don't remember ever saying things positive about Netflix. I feel like I'm always talking shit about Netflix too.
We talked about Fortnite. So maybe he's talking about, like, we're talking about, like...
Well, I think he's probably catching a vibe. That's probably true. So I think it's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. And
yeah, me too.
I mean, my answer is I don't think video games are inferior, but I think my experience makes me feel like they are. Just the way I grew up, it was always like, you know, what are you going to be inside playing video games all day? It was just this like negative connotation. And I never played the types of games that had story, so I never came to appreciate that art form. I hated RPGs.
What's that?
It's like
Role-playing?
Final Fantasy. Yeah, role-playing game.
Oh, okay.
So it's like Final Fantasy and like, well, there's, you know, even Zelda, I think, was like one of the first RPGs, which I hated Zelda. But Mario had a fucking great storyline. I mean, saving the princess and all that.
Oh, Mario.
So yeah, you know, I think that's good. I'm glad you brought that out because I'm
Yeah.
sure other people feel that way. And I think it's probably just the way our story is. It's a blind spot where I don't really have an appreciation for that art form. But I don't want to talk shit about
But
it
even
either.
hearing Cliff, his appreciation for it helped me be like, oh, I probably have no idea like how cool and helpful and, like you said, an art these things actually are.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
And I do have, I mean, if we were to really get into it, you know, I think I'm more attuned to the negative aspects of the alternate reality world that video games can be. But I think just like porn or anything else we've discussed, there's pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm sure there's dangers to living in an alternate reality. But I don't see them as bad or less than on paper. I just think that's just like how we feel about it. So, great question.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for asking that. Okay. That's all we got for today.
A long one today.
Yeah. I thought it was good, though. I think
Yeah,
it was
me
fun
too.
hearing you talk about that book. I don't even have the phone number in front of me. I think it's 206-651-5744. Well, I have it memorized.
Nice.
That's it. 206-651-5744.
Got to dust off the,
If you want to
memory
call.
bank.
And I really don't want to just talk shit passive-aggressively about the chairs, but the situation with the chairs is this. We're sitting on these shitty chairs. We've been sitting on them for an hour and 21 minutes and 29 seconds as of now. And we have a chair fund over here. If you guys would like to contribute that, you're totally welcome. Under no obligation to, but every dollar is appreciated. And there's links to that below. There's links to the book below.
And we'll definitely talk about it if you donate money.
Oh, yeah. we definitely like the opposite of shame, whatever that is, those people. The phone number is below and all that stuff. Thanks for the questions this week. Hope this was helpful. We love getting comments. The best way to leave comments is on the YouTube channel, the podcast YouTube channel under the episode. We read all those. That's it.
Great.
Thanks, guys. What? One of these days, I'm going to actually get that.
Thank you for listening to Fight for Together. We'll see you next time.
One of these days we're going to hire a tech person.